Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday. We're so happy to see you all. The weather is raining in Charleston, so it's going to be a nice break inside for the next hour together, and hopefully the weather's cooperating wherever you are. But we're going to get started in just a minute. But in the meantime, we have a fun chat box question. So you're going to go ahead and pull up your chat box. You're going to share what organization are you with, and share what your favorite summer activity is this year. So go ahead, introduce yourself, and we'll know who's in the meeting together, and then we'll get started in just about 2 minutes. All right, so if you just joined, we're sharing what organization we're with and what our favorite summer activity is. So we have Christine Spalding from the Greater Kanawha Foundation. It's good to see you. And her favorite activity is spending time with the grandkids at the pool. I agree with you 100%. I love the pool. I haven't made it this year, but that's one of my favorite things to do. And let's see, who else do we have? We have Catherine from Bethlehem Farm. It's good to see you. And Catherine loves cycling, which is always so pretty this time of year. And then we have Christina. Hey, Christina, we have an alumni. Christina used to host this webinar with me. It's so good to see you. And she is with the Summers County Humane Society, and her favorite summer activity is camping, which I believe it. So I'm glad you're here. Who else? Nancy Harris. I recognize your name. It's so good to see you. Her favorite activity, well, she's with the Greenbrier River Trail Association. So I would assume Nancy's favorite activity might be cycling as well. And let's do one more shout out and then we'll get started. These are really fun. If you have a minute, just check it out and you can see who else is on today's training with us. So lastly, I would like Frank Rogers' answer. He's from the Cacapon Institute and his is tomatoes, but he has a sideways face. So Frank, I think you either have not enough tomatoes or too many tomatoes. And we'll leave it at that. So you can go ahead and filter through those while I start our introduction. But my name is Dana Bryant. I'm going to be the host of today's webinar, and I'm joined by one of our newest coworkers, Colton Frame. He's going to be helping us during today's training. He will let you in and out of the webinar. So if you get kicked out, know that we can let you back in. Colton will let you in, and he'll also keep an eye on the chat box. So if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box, and we'll take care of it for you. As always, today's recording will be recorded. So after today's presentation, I'll send you a recording of this webinar as well as the link to the slides. So know that for the next hour, you can sit back and relax, and I'll send you all that information later today. So if this is your first time joining you, it's so nice to meet you. Today's training is part of our Volunteer West Virginia webinar series. We started this series during COVID as a way to connect. Christina and I started it together and we loved it so much we've kept it ever since. So this is our free monthly training series where we explain our programs, network, provide trainings, and we have fun. So this will be a really casual, good use of your hour together. If you haven't signed up for our upcoming webinars, you're not going to want to miss them. We have a few more left for this year. In August, we're going to have Shannon Stover, and she's going to be talking all about community inquiry assessment techniques. So this would be really good if you're trying to develop programming at your nonprofit, at your organization, to hear what the community needs, or maybe you need some data for a grant application. This would be a really good training for you. And then we have September, that's National Preparedness Month. So we always do a topic around that. So if you have clients or staff that you'd like to train to be prepared for a disaster and emergency, you're going to want to sign up for that webinar. And then in October, we're going to talk all about volunteer recruitment. I know that's everyone's favorite topic. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to meet with 3 different volunteer coordinators throughout the state, and they're going to let us know some volunteer recruitment strategies that really work at their organization. So I'm still looking for volunteer managers for that training. If you would like to be one of our special guests, we would love to have you. I'm going to put my email address in the chat because I feel like someone on today's webinar might be interested in that opportunity. So if you're interested in being a special guest for our October webinar, send me an email. I would love to have you. And then we're going to have a new training in November. storytelling and words that work for competitive grants with Nikki Bentley Colehart from the Grant Advantage. You're not going to want to miss that. And then lastly, we're at the end of the year. In December, we're going to talk about effective advisory councils. So if you're interested in learning more about boards today, you'll probably be curious to hear about effective advisory councils in December. So that is a lineup of all the rest of the trainings for the year. And if you'd like to sign up, you can go to our website, volunteer.wv.gov, and sign up so they're on your calendar. So today we have a brand new topic we've never dived into before, and we had over 200 people register for today's webinar, so it seems like it's really popular. We're going to be talking about essential board member training, and that's going to include the roles and the legal duties of a board member. And we are lucky to be joined by a special guest. We have Shannon. She is the Director of Nonprofits Lead at Marietta College. I've loved working with Shannon, so here's a little bit about her. Shannon is the Director of Nonprofits Lead at Marietta College, a role that she has held since March of 2024. In this role, she has helped nonprofit organizations like you all build capacity in the areas of finances, information technology, human resources, marketing, network, governance, and operations. With over 10 years of nonprofit experience, Shannon has held roles within the Girl Scouts of Black Diamond Council, the Heart of Florida United Way, and is a proud AmeriCorps alum. She has earned her Gold Award, the highest award a Girl Scout can earn, in 2010. She is an active first aid /CPR/AED trainer with the American Red Cross and holds multiple certificates in mental health first aid. She also currently serves on the board of directors at the North Star Child Advocacy Center. Shannon currently resides in Parkersburg with her husband and 2 dogs. And without further ado, I want to introduce Shannon. Hey, Shannon.
Dana, thanks for having me.
Of course, we're so lucky to have you today. So let's see, are your slides up perfectly?
Yep, they look good.
All right, we'll take it off, girl.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So board governance is probably one of my favorite things to talk about. So I hope you can feel that energy and passion throughout the presentation today, because I really believe that strong boards provide such good guidance and direction to our nonprofit organizations. And without it, organizations are going to struggle. So I'm really, really excited and really passionate about this topic, and I'm excited to be with you all this afternoon. So just a quick kind of recap here about me. So I am the Director of Nonprofits Lead, which I've been since March of 2024, so almost 2.5 years. But I do have over a decade of experience working and volunteering for nonprofits. It's what I know. It's what I love. I eat, sleep, and breathe nonprofit work. So I'm very comfortable in this space. And I'm actually currently the Vice President of the board of North Star Child Advocacy Center. And I've been there for about 2 years. So if you are in the child advocacy space and would love a connection, please reach out to me. I'm happy to also be a supporter and a connection in that space too. So we'll keep going because you heard enough about me, and we'll get into some of this. Okay, so for our time together, kind of 3 things I'm hoping that we take away. So first is purpose and scope. So this is a high level overview of board governance. When I teach board governance in general, it can be somewhere between 4 maybe to 8 hours. So it can go really in depth. And so we're not going to be able to go that in depth today. So this is very high level. But if there are questions, please pop them in the chat. My contact information will be at the end. So please reach out to me. I'm happy to provide some additional context if needed. But this is going to be a very high level overview for you. Some of the core concepts we're going to talk about. So being a good steward of the organization's resources, how to hold some folks accountable, and long-term values for the organization. And then the impacts for you, you're going to understand your role in strategy, risk management, leadership oversight, and culture as well. Okay. So what is a nonprofit board? So the standard definition that we use is that a nonprofit board is an organization's governing body that is required by law, and they set the mission, strategy, and goals of the organization. So one thing I really want to emphasize first off is nonprofits are required by law to have boards. This is not just for accountability or for financial purposes or for programmatic reasons, these organizations are required by federal law to have a nonprofit board of directors. So it's very important that folks who are sitting in these seats understand the true necessary goals and necessary plans that they have to have being on the board. They have to understand their roles and responsibilities. That is why it is so important that everybody take this role seriously and participate, because this is required by law, and there are some legal duties and potential ramifications for the board of directors. So training like this is so essential. Okay, so this is just a really funny short video before we start going into some of the roles and responsibilities.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of the digital economy.
This was obviously a funny commercial for that company, but the message I feel like will resonate because folks, if you want to share in the chat, you probably have felt that you are herding cats, whether these cats were your volunteers or your staff or your kids or somebody else. At some point, we have all probably felt like we've been herding cats. So I just thought this was a funny, memorable way to maybe start off the training with you all. All right. So before we get into the kind of 10 roles and responsibilities, which if you're not familiar, this information comes from BoardSource, which is one of the most reliable places where boards can get information from. What do you think boards do? Or if your board doesn't do it, maybe something your board should do? So I'll invite you all to pop some ideas in the chat for us. Raise funds. Okay. Meet regularly. Yep. Policies. Definitely. Set goals. Advise staff. Yeah. Yes. Approve the budget. That's a big one. Address governance issues. Support those in charge. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of good information here. Vote on tasks. Okay. Solve problems. Ooh, that's a good one. I'd love to hear more about how boards solve problems. Provide direction. Yes, should not get into the weeds. Oh, yes, we are going to talk about that. Boards shouldn't. Any ideas on what boards shouldn't do? I've got a couple of ideas on that one too. Micromanage. Woo! Sarah put that in all caps, so I'm wondering if there's some discussion there. So David asked the question, are the nonprofit rules and regulations in IRS publications? And if so, which one? Sarah pleads the fifth. So David, I'm not totally 100% sure. Can you try to maybe ask that question a different way? Just so I make sure I understand what you're asking before we jump into that. And then we can always come back to that too, if we need to. So we'll go ahead and keep running here, Dana. And if David wants to chat if David pops out in a chat, we can come back to that, or I can chat with him. Okay, so number one, determine mission and purpose. So the purpose of a mission statement. So every nonprofit organization should have a really solid mission statement That mission statement should guide every decision, every program, every strategic decision that the organization is going to make. And remember that that mission statement is the most important PR and marketing tool that you have. And so the way I like to think about this is that if you are doing some sort of fundraiser, or you're selling a product, or you're providing some sort of a service or something, people aren't necessarily buying that specific product. So they're not going to buy your fundraising dinner. They're not going to buy a car wash, right? They buy why you do it. So your mission is the most important thing to promote to them. So if they don't know where the funds are going to go, or they don't know how you're going to utilize those funds that they're generously giving to you through their fundraisers, that's a misstep for you all. And that's an opportunity for you to be able to reframe some of that discussion, because yes, the fundraiser of a dinner is providing a hot meal, and that's also amazing. But if those funds are going to help people who are experiencing homelessness, that's what people are really spending their money on. So use that mission statement in everything. It should be unique and recognizable, but it also should be working for you. And what I mean by working for you is if it's 3 paragraphs long, you can't remember it, you know that you do this program and you know that you really care about this population of people, but your mission statement is not succinct enough, then that's again maybe another opportunity for the board to come together and start thinking about restructuring that mission statement. Because you can revise that mission statement. You will want to refile that with the IRS once you have some of that. And if you need to work any of that into your bylaws or anything like that. But it should be working for you. And if it's not, that's okay. The organization and board just need to come together on that. And lastly, with your mission statement, put it on everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Your website, your social medias, your board meeting notes, anything that anybody can have access to and see, they should be able to see your mission statement, because that is your whole purpose for existing. So make sure that mission statement is working for you, and make sure that the public knows what it is. My general guidelines on this, I would suggest that a mission statement is no more than maybe 12 to 15 words, because anything longer than that, you're going to risk not knowing what the organization does, it being too confusing, and people aren't unfortunately going to remember it. So 12 to 15 words is probably your sweet spot. So number 2, I kind of bulked this together a little bit. So numbers 2 and 3 are select, support, and evaluate the CEO. So let's take a couple seconds here in the chat to fill in the blank. So who is responsible for hiring the lead staff person? Who do we think? Board? Yep, absolutely. So then who's going to hire other staff? Yes, that one should be the lead staff person. Yes. And this is where some of you, I think, maybe have potentially seen some micromanagement happen. Oversees volunteers. Who is overseeing your volunteers? Staff? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Depending on, yes, yes, Christina, definitely. It does depend on the org. But yes, Melinda, for sure, staff member, unless you have no state paid staff person, and then it's other volunteers are overseeing volunteers. But remember, board members are volunteers too. So that might be a little bit of a tricky question. And then lastly, who's going to oversee day-to-day operations? Yes, your director or your lead staff person, right? This is one of those areas where sometimes I see some micromanagement issues, and we'll get into a little bit of that here. Yes, not the board. Yes, not the board, 100%. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but that day-to-day stuff should not be your board. Your board should not be doing that. So some ways that we can support and evaluate the CEO. Notice it also doesn't say micromanage or hover or overwhelm the CEO. It really says support and evaluate. So some good ways that you might be able to do that, making sure that you have annual goals the CEO set. So if the board realizes that there's a certain fundraising threshold that needs to be met, then that needs to be discussed with the CEO. That needs to be outlined in some sort of performance review. But that performance review or evaluation is not going to be beneficial if they're not going to be evaluated. So there has to be some sort of regular timing that the CEO is reviewed by the board, making sure that's truly a joint process for the lead staff to give their opinions and their feedback, and the board to have their time as well. But a consistent, regular evaluation needs to happen, not just to discuss if there's a pay increase or discussion there, but truly to remember that these folks are employed here in this case, and if they are employed in that space, they may want an employment record. There's all sorts of things that tie into that. So making sure you're doing some sort of evaluation annually is really important. And then lastly, one that I don't think I see enough of is that the CEO has professional development opportunities. So this could be attending conferences. This could be attending workshops. This could be taking online classes. Whatever it is, I've never seen a CEO that maybe necessarily has 100% of all the required characteristics and knowledge of being a good CEO. So there's always some area that they could use some additional support and encouragement with. So make sure that they have access to those, because if the board is finding that they don't feel the CEO is being transparent with the funds, for example, then there's an opportunity there, right? Maybe there's an Excel workshop they could take to be able to figure out Excel. Maybe there's a discussion of a CRM and how that might be able to help them. And Sarah is 100% right. There is no such thing as too much knowledge and training. I could not agree more. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So number 4 is ensure effective planning. So I saw this a little bit in the chat about some strategic planning and some vision casting and some things with folks sharing in the chat. So I like to think of strategic planning kind of as a cycle. And so I know that's a little bit of a different way to think about planning, because when you think about it, sometimes, and I know I've been guilty of this as well, I just check off that I did my strategic plan, right? Has anybody else ever done that? You might have checked off that you've done it, and then that strategic plan goes into a nice little drawer or sits on the shelf and you never utilize it again. I know I've definitely done that before too. And strategic plans aren't super effective if that's all they do for you. If they just sit and collect dust, they're not helping the organization move and advance and grow. So here are some important questions that I would ask if I was doing some effective strategic planning with an organization. And as Nonprofits Lead, we do, that's one of the services we provide is consulting. And so we do walk organizations through effective planning and strategic visioning and things. So if that's something that might interest you or you'd like to have a discussion about that, you can definitely reach out to me. But here are some of the questions that we go over. So first of all, understanding where you are. If we don't have that baseline, it's impossible for us to know where we're going to get. So knowing where we are and where we want to go are those very early questions. So secondly, how? So how are we going to achieve this? It's loosely a where, when, what, who, how, why kind of vibe. But knowing how it's going to actually happen. So if there are some technology challenges that need to be addressed, there are staffing challenges that need to be addressed, that's the plan, and that's the space where you'd want to talk through some of those potential obstacles. So what are we missing and what do we need to do? So what are we missing is often the challenge or the holdup, and where some plans stop almost. Because sometimes the biggest thing I hear is, what are we missing? We're missing funds, we're missing money, we're missing staff, we're missing time, we're missing capacity. You're always going to be missing something, right? If you have all of those, please let me know. I'd love to know how you got them all. But that's okay. This gives you the chance to think about what you might, what obstacles you might have and how you might be able to overcome them. No effective plan is going to be effective without understanding who's going to be responsible for all of this. So it's very important. My friends over at Mission Met in Athens have this great model that they use, and they identify the who's as champions. And so they pick champions for parts of their effective plan. And so that way the group or person feels really empowered and energized to take a part of this effective planning process. So it's really important that you have some of those people identified. That way it all also doesn't fall to the board chair to do or to the secretary because they have all the notes, right? It's really important that we establish who's going to be responsible for these things. And then when do we know we have achieved our goals? Is it when a certain financial goal is met, when a certain number of clients served is met? Whatever those goalposts are, the board is going to be really integral in making sure those are figured out. So I know I've said a bunch of things so far. Has anything really resonated with you just yet? Definitely pop some ideas in the chat if something has resonated with you or if you have a question about something. I want to make sure we are not just running through this without giving anybody a chance to share. Anything yet? Dana, has anything resonated with you?
Let's see. I love the idea of the mission statement. I think it would be fun to do a poll of your board members and see how many of them know your mission statement.
Yeah.
That would be a fun challenge. And then I would start putting it on the bottom of our meeting agendas.
It's a great idea. Yeah, Stacy says making sure who is responsible. Yep. And support for leadership, getting professional development. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one, right? We want all of our staff to have access to professional development for sure. But if you want that CEO to grow and do bigger and more and really thrive in their role, they have to have opportunities for enhancement too. So professional development's a big one. Okay, so this is the one. I love the discussions that I often hear when I talk about monitoring and strengthening programs, because this is one of those big places where I tend to see some micromanagement, right? Or some overstepping or some boundaries or some things. So as this slide says here for you, it's the board's role to ensure that the programs are aligning with the organization's mission and truly monitoring that they're being effective. But the board should not be involved in day-to-day operations. So without naming names or putting anybody uncomfortable on a spot, has anybody experienced this really well or maybe not well? I'd love to hear if somebody has seen this happen really well or really not well. And if not, how do you think that the board can help make sure the programs align with the mission statement and not just that they're doing a program to do a program? Deborah Castile says, oh boy.
I think part of that, I'm very fortunate. I've been in my role for 15 years.
Wow.
I did not always have the board that I have now, but I think it also falls on the executive director to make sure that the information is being conveyed transparently. So
Yeah.
yes, my board lets me do my job, and that's their job. Their job is to let me do my job, and they do it. But I also make myself available for questions so that they don't have to micromanage. And I also make sure that my reports are thorough without too much information. So I've seen both. I've seen really, really tough times with boards, but also am, thank goodness, currently thriving with the board.
Yeah. Yeah, Claudia, thanks for sharing that. I think we're going to talk about some common pitfalls here in a little bit towards the end of the training. But that is often one of that where information is not flowing as well as it should either direction. And that kind of can create the mistrust and micromanaging. So I for sure understand and appreciate that you have a great board. That's exciting that you have a good board now that lets you do your job, because, those board members may have full-time jobs and kids and other responsibilities too. And so they need to be able to let the lead staff person do their job like that. You are 100% right. They hired you to do a job, or they selected you to do the job if you're not a paid staff person. But they need to let that happen. And sometimes that control is a little bit hard for boards, right? Especially somebody I saw someone in here mentioned board members who have founded the organization stay too close to the day-to-day operations and then criticize process improvements. That is so true. Christina, thank you for sharing that, because founder syndrome is a real, it's a tough cookie to crack. Because that they literally feel like this organization is their baby, right? They brought it up from infancy and grew it up, and now it's this big whole person, and they don't quite see that as something that they need to kind of step back on. So I've talked to some organizations through this, and one of the best things we've been able to do is kind of scale back and roll back their responsibilities, so we don't just kind of cold turkey them. So maybe instead of attending every meeting, they become like an immediate past president role. So they're still able to consult with the organization, or they're able to provide some feedback and ideas, but they're not attending every time. They're not voting members. Like, kind of just slowly scale back the amount of influence and decision-making power they have. But sometimes that's still really tough. And that's another suggestion we talked about is reworking those bylaws and making sure that term limits are being enforced, or if there's no term limits listed, maybe writing those term limits and making sure that those are standing. So that way you can, at that point, also thank them for their service, appreciate the time that they've given, but it is also time for them to roll off. So it's not I don't like to call, like we're leaving or we're kicking them out, but maybe we're sunsetting their position or we're sunsetting their time with us. So it sounds a little more graceful, a little more tactful than just get out because you won't let anybody else help. All right, so we're going to keep moving. Thank you all for the chats and the feedback and stuff. There's a lot of discussion around this one, which I really appreciate, and I definitely understand. Okay, so we're going to dabble a little bit here into some finances. Again, this is high level, so there's a lot more to this, but this is just a broad overview for you. So I kind of bucket these a little bit into 3 different roles here. So for the first one, the board should take an active role in financially supporting the organization. So what does that look like? Okay, so that could look like a number of things. First one could be an annual giving requirement. So this one is always a touchy one, I've noticed. But the board should have some sort of giving requirement. Okay. I'm not going to tell you that it needs to be $100, $1,000, $50, $5. I am not going to give you a dollar amount. What I would suggest is calling it something personally significant. Okay. And so that could be written into your bylaws as a personally significant gift, because personally significant gift to me could be very different than what personally significant to Dana looks like, right? So we don't want to force individuals to feel that they have to give a certain dollar amount, but we do want them to financially contribute to the organization. And I'll give you a free insider tip on that one too. If you've ever applied to a grant or a foundation, talk to anybody who's giving dollars out in some way, most of them are very interested in knowing the percentage of your board members that contribute to the organization. So they don't necessarily care about the dollar amount or how much you're giving. They just are interested in knowing how many of your board members give. Because from their perspective, why should they contribute to your organization financially if your own board doesn't believe in the organization enough to contribute? Okay. Oscar, could be, yes, it could be in kind. So we'll talk a little bit about a couple of the ways that board members can give in a few minutes. But I do still lean a little more towards actual dollars. But that could also be, you're going to have a spaghetti dinner, so they donate all of the garlic bread or something like that, because you could quantify that and get a dollar amount on how much garlic bread they donated. But yes. Okay. So lastly, the other piece of fundraising and that some people have kind of danced around a little bit in the chat as well, is boards should be participating in fundraisers. Okay. So that could be going in, potentially soliciting new donors, identifying sponsors for other things, but they should take an active role in helping to financially secure more financial resources. So they should be playing a part in that. I'm not sure what Claudia, I didn't read all of Claudia's comments, but I saw ask, ask, ask. And I was like, that is 100% true. The answer is always no unless you ask. So for the board I sit on, that's part of what we do is we try to bring that in and we try to make sure people think about that. So Patty says, my concern with significant contribution is that it might deter younger folks from being board members if they don't feel they have adequate finances. For sure. So I wouldn't call it significant. I would call it personally significant. So that way, because I think the word significant, someone might take that as big money, like a lot of money. Like I would think a significant contribution could be big, but that's why I call it personally significant. That way that person gets to decide what that contribution looks like. And John said you could always have a youth seat. That's very true. You could write something like that into your bylaws and have something like that for sure. For sure. Okay. So keeping us moving here, the board should review and approve an annual operating budget. A lot of folks were mentioning that one in the chat. And then controls. This is where I think another area that boards sometimes could use some improvements because things weren't as set in stone or as clear. There weren't some clear guidelines here. So the board should have some mechanisms for checks and balances. So that could mean that the lead staff person can spend up to X amount without board approval. So the CEO, in a case of emergency, can spend whatever necessary if there's, a concern with the building. Or if they're going to purchase something for the organization, they can spend up to $1,000 without board approval. Something like that. Some sort of clear guideline on how much can be done with and without board approval. That could also look like bids, for example. So if the organization is going to spend a significant amount of money, so anything over $5,000 has to have 3 bids or 2 bids or something like that. This is where conflicts of interest can unfortunately creep in as well. I saw this as well with an organization that had a contractor who was a board member, and the organization needed some building work done. And so they just went with that contractor because he was a board member and didn't take any other bids or talk to any other organization. And unfortunately, he kind of took advantage of that situation a little bit. And work wasn't completed on time. And he just said, well, you know who I am. I'm going to get it done eventually. And corners were cut and bad decisions were made. And if that organization would have had a control for this and said, okay, it was over X amount of dollars and we need to take bids and then vote on those bids, that person might not necessarily have gotten the job. So it's really important to have some of those checks and balances in place. Okay. Yes, honesty and transparency is key. Something in writing in addition to voting is good too, for sure. Definitely. I am a fan of virtual voting as well. I really do love that. I know there's some people that are like, oh my goodness, can't vote virtually, but I'm a big fan of that because if you set up, a Microsoft form or something like that, it's going to collect all that information and give you a nice little summary and a little document at the end that shows you who clicked what at what time. And so, yeah. Oh, Catherine, our board member agreement states, I give an annual personal donation of an amount that makes me feel proud. I love that. Yes, I love that. That's awesome. I think that's a great way for people to feel good about what they're doing, but still financially contributing. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so kind of along the same lines here a little bit. She can't take credit for it. That's okay. It's still really good. So number 7 here, protecting assets and providing financial oversight. So if you are like me and you're not a financial guru and you don't know all the things about finances, because it is definitely not my expertise, here are just a few key financial questions I would be thinking about and prepared to ask as a good board member. So first one are we running a gain or a loss? So do we have more money coming in than we're spending? Secondly, are key sources of income rising or falling? So if you have consistent grants that come in, are those grants coming in at what you expect? Did they come in on time? Did they come in more? Did they come in less? So understanding what's coming in and is it where you were expecting it to be is really important to know. Thirdly, are key expenses under control? So one of the big places that organizations spend money on is personnel. So that's staff salaries, insurance benefits, fringe, that sort of thing. And if you're like us, insurance costs are rising everywhere. And so we're spending more on insurance in places than maybe we would have thought. So it's really important for the board to know and monitor how those key expenses are happening. So if things are jumping, the board needs to be aware and making sure that's allocated for correctly in the budget. So do we have sufficient reserves? So this is another question that I get a ton from some of my nonprofit folks is if I have some sort of reserve fund, whether that's, just a rainy day fund, an endowment, some sort of money that's external to our normal everyday checking account, then our funders or grantors or foundations aren't going to want to fund me if they think I already have the money. And that is actually 100% false. And I've asked almost every foundation that I know this question, and they've all told me absolutely not, because knowing that you have some reserves makes you look like a more financially solvent organization. Because from their perspective, they don't want to put their money and resources into an organization that is totally reliant on you or on them. They want to see that what happens on a rainy day? Do you have any additional resources? Anything else you can fall back on? So they love to see that you actually have some reserves. Ideally, you'd have at least 6 to 9 months of operating expense somewhere tucked away. But again, something is better than nothing. So John says we recently wrote in a reserve policy, so we had something saved. Great idea. I love that. And then lastly, are we comparing our finances to the budget? So this one I feel like is a little bit of a no-brainer. At every single board meeting, there should be a discussion of how much was brought in and how much was expensed, between that and the last board meeting, but also for the total year. So that way, if okay, we need to raise X amount of dollars before the end of the fiscal year to make our budget, that you're having that conversation, not the month before it needs to happen, right? That gives you a chance to adjust, cut expenses if you need to, be creative, think outside the box to get you there. So again, this is very high level overview. There is a lot to financial oversight with 990s and audits and things like that. So this is just high level overview. But if you have questions about some of that other stuff, please reach out to me. I'm happy to kind of debrief some of that with you. We're going to move on. Number 8. Okay, so number 8, build a competent board. So that is actually the board's responsibility, is to make sure that they're building a competent board. Now, my caveat to this is yes, if the executive director knows somebody or wants to bring someone to the organization or something, I'm not saying that the executive director can't play a part in this, but it is ultimately the board's responsibility to make sure that they are building a board that is competent and going to continue to serve the organization. So here are some basic kind of requirements for those nonprofit board members. So making sure that they share the vision and have a passion for the cause. If they don't like animals, you might not want to ask them to be on the Humane Society board, right? That might not be the best place for them. You want them to bring valuable skills, resources, and experience. So they need to have some sort of skill or something that they can share. Make sure they have a basic understanding of the legal requirements, which we're going to get into in just a second. And lastly, have the capacity to serve. That one I think gets lost sometimes because if you find somebody who's really strong in one of those other categories, but doesn't have the capacity to serve, they still might not be the best fit for a board member for you. So I like to say that board members should be contributing 2 out of those 3: time, talent, and treasure. So ideally, a great board member is contributing all 3. Okay. So ideally, all 3 to the organization, but good board members give at least 2. And then if some board member is only giving 1, even yes, if it's just treasure, I would encourage you to think about that. Okay. Because that person, even if they're donating their money and they're just writing you a check, their vote still counts just as much as everybody else. They are still just as liable as everybody else. So if they are not informed, they don't know what's going on, they haven't been asking questions, they are still just as liable as anybody else in that organization. So just something for you to think about. So I like to kind of wrap that up. I love alliterations here on the screen. You probably can see that. I love to tell boards that they should be recruiting the doers, the donors, and the door openers, right? So the doers, the donors, and the door openers. All right, number 9. Yes. I will not also take credit. I had a great mentor that said a couple of those to me. So I definitely have been borrowing some of his information as well. Okay, so I'm going to, again, high-level overview some of this. But the first thing I'm going to ask before I get into this is everybody aware of what D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance? Does anybody know what D&O insurance is? No. Yes. Okay. Claudia gave me a thumbs up. Nope, I'm new. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just give a real quick, yes, I know we have it. That's good. And yes, but we still need to get it. Okay, perfect. I'll just do a quick overview of D&O. So if I were a brand new board member, newbie, and I was going to join a board, this is my very first question I would ask. Straight out of the gate. Before anything else, my very first question would be, do you carry directors and officers insurance? So D&O insurance protects the individual board members from being personally liable if somebody would launch a lawsuit against the organization. So if somebody wants to sue you, they could go online or wherever you have your board members' information posted and list every single board member in that lawsuit. Okay. But if the organization carries D&O, that means that individual board members cannot be personally sued for whatever that issue is. So Bernadette, yes, it covers the actions of our directors and board. So it makes sure that that's covered. And so if you do not carry D&O, I would highly, highly, highly suggest that you look into it and take out a policy, because I, as a board member, have never paid to have D&O insurance. It's always been provided by the organization and can probably be wrapped into some other policies that you have. But I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend you look into D&O if you don't. Melinda, would that cover ED's paid staff? Not from my understanding. No, that covers the board. But there may be something out there that does cover paid staff. If there is, I'm just not aware of it. But this is specifically for the board side. Okay, so our 3 legal duties here: duty of care, paying attention to the organization's activities and operations. So some of you mentioned in the beginning when we asked what boards do, I saw some of those that say attend meetings and read minute notes and things. That's kind of their duty of care. They have to care about what you're doing. So they have to show up. They have to vote. If you send out board votes, they have to participate and care about the organization. Their second duty here is duty of loyalty. So putting the interest of the organization before personal and professional. So this could go back to kind of that example I gave you just a little bit ago about the construction organization. That was probably not their best duty of loyalty because that person gained business and a monetary, they got money out of it, right? And so that is why conflict of interest policies are super important. I saw somebody mention that in the chat just a little bit ago. Those are so, so important. And anybody, honestly, that construction company, individual, staff person who was on the board probably should have even recused himself from even being considered. that would have been my biggest suggestion, is not even throw in a bid, just to make it seem super fair. And then lastly there, duty of obedience. So complying with applicable federal, state, and local laws, and then adhering to the organization's bylaws. So again, this is where you're getting into 990s, annual paperwork that has to be filled out, audits, all that stuff. Okay. Yeah, Joseph, he says, I'm pretty sure you can still be sued. D&O insurance will cover legal fees and also cover cost liability claims. I am definitely not an insurance expert by any stretch of the imagination. That is not for sure what I do every day. So I would 100% encourage you to look into that, but it is still something I would recommend for sure. And then lastly here, our last role and responsibility is just enhance the organization's public standing. So by educating the community, leveraging networks, building credibility, creating awareness, making sure the organization is active in the community and that the community knows you're there is so important, and the board should be involved in that. Okay. So quickly here, we're going to talk about just some common governance issues, and some of you have thrown some of these in the chat. First one I see a lot is micromanagement, which typically happens when there's a lack of trust or unclear role boundaries. So there are assessments online that the board can take to assess themselves. There are like we played kind of at the beginning of whose role is it? Makes me feel of whose line is it anyway, or whose job is it anyway. You could do those and make sure kind of everybody knows like which lane they're in, but that's where micromanagement typically arises. Member disengagement. So this is those folks that don't come to board meetings. This is those folks who don't respond when you reach out. So they're actually limiting the value of your board by being unprepared, passive, or just not involved. And so this is where, again, I would encourage you to refer back to your bylaws, because if there is not some sort of an attendance requirement or something written into that, or if you haven't responded in this sort of timeline, some sort of policy there to help with those. Sometimes, folks, you're just asking the right questions to the wrong people. And that's unfortunately sometimes the answer. But just remember, they are bringing the entire board down when they're unprepared, passive, or just not involved. Conflicts of interest. This is another big one I see, and this is real or perceived conflicts. And I hear that question too sometimes. How is a perceived conflict? How is that bad or worse than a real conflict? And I say that because we have all been there where somebody was quickly moved out of a position or quickly left the organization, and people filled in the blanks on why it happened, right? That happens. So people may do that, and that can undermine the credibility in decision-making if things aren't unmanaged. So if you are obviously in a position of a crisis or a situation that's happened, we don't want to be more transparent than we need to be or can be legally, right? We don't want to do that. But we also don't want the public to create their own perceptions, okay? And lastly, as we've talked about quite a bit already today, poor information flow. So lack of clear communication between lead, staff, and board truly does weaken the oversight and can unfortunately cause surprises or issues. All right. So lastly, I just have some key takeaways for you that I love. This is what I'm hoping you got from our last hour together. So strong governance can help you create a clarity of purpose, give you some ethical oversight, and give you strategic guidance. Role clarity is so important. If you don't have job descriptions for your board members, I highly recommend you look into those. Not even just for your board president, vice president, chair, secretary, treasurer, what have you. Every single board member needs at least a basic job description, but that helps boards support management efficiently. Continuous learning, we've talked about that a good bit as well. So governance is an ongoing practice, and there needs to be space and time for reflection, learning, and shared experiences together. That's so important to the board. Continuing to be strong and move the organization. And then lastly, encourage discussion. I've heard, unfortunately, folks silenced or felt like they were silenced in board meetings and couldn't share, couldn't talk. So board members should always be invited to discuss improvements. And I did put the word practical in there because, yes, sometimes board members will go on tangents or go sideways or something. So we want to make sure this is practical and useful and timely, but we should always open the floor for discussion and encourage there to be a chance for people to share. Okay. I think that kind of wraps us up. So any other questions or comments or anything else you'd like to pop in the chat or unmute and talk about? And then Dana, while that's happening, if you want to advance me one more slide. So there is our contact information, website, phone number, my LinkedIn, if you're active on that. And then the QR code will scan to our listserv. So we do mostly weekly email with different resources and program opportunities and things. You can scan that and sign up for our listserv if you're interested in that. Tammy says, thoughts on EDs managing up to their board of directors. So you mean like they decide they are stepping out of the ED role and going onto the board? Is that kind of what you're...
I was thinking more along the lines of like our board right now is kind of young and in a transition. And I've been in this role for 10, 11 years. And I'm struggling a little bit with telling who I perceive to be my boss what they should be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So that could put you in a tricky, awkward conversation. So honestly, one of the best things I can suggest to you is to either reach out to me, your local community foundation, another consultant. Sometimes that feedback is received better when it's not, it doesn't feel as personal because it's not coming from you, right? So you're not hurting feelings. I'm not, we're not trying to hurt feelings, but we're also just trying to make sure everybody has role clarity. You could also go back to Board Source. There are some really great resources on there. There's some good articles and things. Now, not all of them are free. Some of them are paid resources, so just be careful about that. But my suggestion, my biggest suggestion is that just doesn't come from you. That could be maybe another immediate past president, somebody else who's previously served as the chair, just not from you, because sometimes that tends to hurt some feelings.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so Ben says how to avoid long board meetings. Okay, so my first suggestion for this is called a consent agenda. So a consent agenda sent out, I say, at least a week ahead. And so the plan is that, or the assumption is maybe everybody reads that and consents to it when they come to the board meeting. So the first thing on your actual meeting agenda is approval of the consent agenda. That way, if you just need to update them about a program that happened, a staffing change, a grant you submitted, something that doesn't need a full amount of discussion, it's more just kind of a report out. The executive director can put that together, send it out a week ahead of time. And then when you get together, it's, did you read the consent agenda? Do you approve it? Secretary marks it, enters it into the record, and you move on. And then you get into the true discussion points. So that's one of the things I say about avoid long board meetings. The second thing is that's also on the chair. If your board meetings are an hour, they also need to be really mindful of the timing. Send more frequent reports in between meetings. Maybe that can feel micromanagey if you have someone who's not used to or comfortable with sharing more than that. That might feel overbearing if you're asking more of them. One board I'm involved with has long agendas and few action items needed. Yeah, I would go to the consent agenda. That would be my first suggestion for you there. Okay. We survey our board members each year. Yeah, that's a good idea too. Okay. Woo. Board member Claudia says someone who came in and left on the dot. Wow. Yeah. Julie says someone got sidetracked. Yep. sometimes that's what it needs to happen, right? Sometimes that board chair just needs to jump in and say, this is great discussion. However, we need to, it's the chair who gets sidetracked. Maybe your vice chair then. So we are right at 2:00. I also want to be really respectful of your time. So I'm going to kick it back to Dana to close us out.
Thank you. You all had so many questions in the chat box, Shannon. This was a remarkable turnout for this webinar. We had 200 people sign up and 100 people showed up. So that's our highest retention, I would say, for any webinar.
Awesome.
So we could tell how important this topic is, and just based on everyone's conversation, we could tell it was really important for you all too. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If you all who participated have ideas for other board member trainings in the future, send me your idea, because it seems like this is a very popular topic and we can incorporate them into next year's training too. But without any further ado, I think that's it. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation today. Shannon's getting ready to head off to vacation tomorrow, so I want to wish you safe travels, and I hope all the love you received during today's training transcends into your vacation, so you have a wonderful time.
Definitely. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll see you all next month. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.